So our next panel is the Wounded Warrior Career Program demonstration. So here today we have Carol Glazer and Bill Lockwood from the National Organization on Disability. And the Bob Woodruff Foundation has had the opportunity to support a couple of different really meaningful initiatives with the National Organization on Disability. You all are most certainly experts on this topic, and I've heard a lot of other people that are here. I know everyone's excited to hear from you all. So they're going to do a demo a program that helps veterans with serious disabilities achieve meaningful, rewarding, and sustainable civilian careers. So with that, I will turn it over to you all.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. It's great to be in a room full of friends. When we first started this initiative, we'd be up here talking to blank faces that basically were saying, career, wounded warrior, don't think so. Let's figure out how to get benefits and create a comfortable life. So the fact that we're all here talking today about pursuing meaningful careers with a room full of people who really get what that means is just wonderful. We're going to try to keep this interactive because actually we had a conference in the fall and many of you were there. So the presentation that Bill and I were prepared to give, we want to go through very quickly, but we really hope to have an interaction with you. I'm Carol Glazer. I run the National Organization on Disability. We've been around for 30 years. We've addressed just about every aspect of helping people with disabilities ensure a good quality of life, whatever that has meant over the last 30 years. And it really has been a civil rights and other kind of movement that has changed a lot. And our most recent focus is on employment, really as the single biggest barrier to a productive life for people with disabilities. My colleague Bill Lockwood retired from the Army, assistant colonel after 24 years, Bill? 20 years, sorry. And we'll be talking to you about the nuts and bolts of the program and again, hopefully engaging you in conversation. But what I wanted to try to do, just first say a word, well, why does a national disability organization care about wounded warriors? And I think Mr. Gingrich last night made a comment about how this veteran population with the eyes of the nation on it really can be a beacon for all people with disabilities in this country, and that number is about 56 million, and that's about 1 out of every 5 Americans. So, and if you include those in their sphere of influence, those in their family and friends who otherwise are living with that disability, the number, of course, is quite larger. So we saw veterans as a way of turning the eyes of the public and America on a population that can teach us something about a much bigger population. I want to talk a little bit about the history of our program, starting just with a little bit of background about NOD. As I say, we've been around for 30 years. Our mission is to improve the quality of life, and our current focus is on employment. We have a number of projects that are underway related to employment. They include high school students with disabilities. They include helping Fortune 500 companies to mount disability hiring initiatives. The Kessler NOD surveys that are mentioned here, we are data obsessed at NOD. We issue polls, we do everything. We are guided by most of what we do by data, as you'll see when Bill makes his presentation. And then we have a CEO Council, which is a forum for corporate decision makers to get together and talk about how their work is going with disability employment. The top two relate to our work with veterans, and we'll be focusing on the Wounded Warrior Careers demonstration today, which has been funded by the Woodruff Foundation. It started in 2006 when Donald Rumsfeld at the Department of Defense decided to set up a program within the Army to have the Army take care of its most seriously injured veterans. It was a concierge service, the Army Wounded Warrior Program. Are the people in the room familiar with the AW2 program? It's been an enormously successful and really quite innovative program for the Army. And Rumsfeld, when he set this up, believed that the Army should take care of its most seriously injured, and that becoming a productive, contributing member of your community when you come home should be an important, integral part of the transition process. He came to NOD and said, we want this, we don't really know very much about employment, could you help us? So when Dawn Rumsfeld calls and has several thousand veterans that need our help, of course, we went into gear immediately. The first thing we did was we talked him out of the use of the word employment. We said, this is not about getting a job. This is really about a career. That's not an event, it's a process. It could start with education. It could have nothing to do with employment from the get-go. The point is to have somebody be able to pursue their interests and their talents on a trajectory on which they move along and keep advancing over time. So that's why we are Wounded Warrior Careers and not Warrior Employment. The next thing we did was we embedded an NOD staff member in the offices of the Army Wounded Warrior Program for a period of 6 weeks. We wanted to understand the culture of the Army. We wanted to understand how the Army was approaching this population. We wanted to understand what its staff people knew and where their gaps were, and how we could really best help design a component for AW2 that would deal with the career aspect of reintegration. So the embedding process was enormously helpful, and you want to talk about collaboration. Try to get one of your people to actually sit behind a desk at one of your collaborators for a period of 6 weeks. You learn a lot. You learn a lot of really important things that help that collaboration be extremely meaningful. We produced a manual. We trained the AW2 advocates. And then the next thing we did is we went out into the field and we had focus groups with 200 veterans and family members. We wanted to understand their life experience. We wanted to understand their transition challenges, their transition aspirations, and what the experience was like and where career might fit into that. We learned a lot during those focus groups, and what we learned has led to a memorandum of understanding with the U.S. Army and a 3-site, 4-year, $5 million, I like that, $5 million, privately funded initiative that Bill is going to tell you more about. I just wanted to hit on some of the things that we learned in those focus groups. And none of this is going to be new to anybody in the room, but I'll just touch on them briefly because they do come back to the service model we designed and what we've learned about it as we've implemented it over the last 4 years. The most troubling thing was this highly fragmented system of services that were available when people come home. Lots of help, lots of support coming from everywhere. The VA, DOL, the military itself, nonprofit service providers in the community, healthcare, caseworkers, mental health, all coming at them all at the same time during a very, very difficult and very, very sensitive period of a person trying to remake their lives in the face of something that they really never expected. Nobody went into the Army expecting to come home with a serious injury. So it's a very delicate process, and while veterans, we learned, are going through that process, they're basically getting approached by many different people who are all well-intended, but in a system that to them looks totally daunting. Second thing we learned, again, nothing new, disability in general, but in this particular case is a very complex issue that does affect the family, with so many dynamics like spouses becoming breadwinners, people reversing their roles, spouse goes back to school while the injured veteran works, vice versa. What do the children do? How do they feel about a new parent who's coming home, a completely different person? So this isn't a matter of simply support to veterans. This is really about a family intervention. Third thing we learned, and this is something we call the tyranny of low expectations at NOD, and I think Tom Webb, is Tom Webb still here? He always coins these wonderful short phrases that say so much. He used the term aspirational. What I think he was talking about is the fact that for many veterans coming home and encountering the system of supports that they get, the expectations for what they can accomplish are often set very, very low. So you could be an engineer, you could have accomplished unbelievable things in your career before you joined the military. You join the military, you come back injured, well, you carried a gun, so You could be a security officer. It's not infrequent. And that tyranny of low expectations is a very insidious process that has to do with how a veteran ultimately feels about themselves. It's just very hard to expect much of yourself if the world and those who are helping you don't expect much of you. So that was something we heard loud and clear. We heard in some ways that and we learned that this generation of veterans returning from combat is very different from past generations of veterans in terms of their age, their families' circumstances, an all-volunteer force, and their whole life experience. And they're dealing, particularly when they get home, with systems that were set up for a different generation of veterans. And so the needs have changed, and many of the services they confront when they get back home have not. And they all need to be adapted and understand better the intricacies of serious mental health problems, of traumatic brain injury and its cognitive effects, and the new injuries that are part of a new war and a new generation of veterans. And then finally, the most interesting data that we found through our program was a very high correlation between pursuing meaningful activity and your outlook on life. And that was controlling for the nature of a disability or the scale of a disability. What it said to us is that pursuing something meaningful, often we hear, well, he's not ready to go back to work yet. He's got to get better first. Well, that's not true. Pursuing something meaningful, part-time work, volunteer work, can be a critical part of the recovery process. So it's no coincidence that people who are doing something meaningful, again, high expectations. If it's work, all the better. People who are doing things like that have a better expectation of their life outcomes, and we all know about the correlation between what you feel about your life outcomes and your ability to achieve them. So those are some of the things we learned in the focus group. I'll rush right to an intensive career service model that we demonstrated in 3 sites, Dallas, Colorado Springs, and Fayetteville, North Carolina. 2 of those sites are right outside Army bases. 1 was a more diverse metropolitan community. We wanted to have a little bit of a diversity of community types. We aimed for 300 participants. At that time, the population of the Army Wounded Warrior Program was only 1,500. Today it's 10,000. So at that point, 300 was about a 20% slice of the population, and we felt that the lessons we could draw from demonstrating our service model would in fact be able to be extrapolated to that whole population of wounded warriors. We're struggling to keep up. We can't keep up with the Army or with this war, unfortunately. All privately funded. And privately funded allowed us to come to a very close working relationship with the Army without any expectations and with the flexibility. The private money gave us the flexibility to move, make mistakes, correct them, refine the model, not have to go through a lot of bells and whistles. And frankly, it made it easier for the Army to come to us and enter into what today is definitely an unprecedented kind of collaboration, and then was pretty unique as well. So back to that theme of collaboration, Barbara, I think that was a stroke of genius. The theme of collaboration really runs throughout this initiative, because without it and a close working relationship with the Army, we wouldn't have been able to do what we've done. Bill will tell you more about it. You'll hear about the research component. Again, we're data obsessed. You'll hear a lot about outcomes. You'll hear a lot about the veteran population and why we think we've been able to achieve the outcomes that we have. So our next step now is getting it out, getting it big and broad, speaking at conferences like this. And our ultimate hope is that the service delivery model that we've piloted will become the way that this country, employers, service providers, government, deal with this generation and future generations of seriously injured veterans. The last thing I want to say, because you can never go to a funder conference without saying this, and sometimes you mean it and sometimes you don't. But the truth is that the Woodruff Foundation has been absolutely essential to all that we've been able to achieve. And this is one of the conferences when I say that, I mean it. And what I mean by that is that the foundation has been willing to get in early, has been willing to place a bet on a risky, new, untested service model with an organization that it believed in the leadership but had no idea, because this was so new, would be able to execute. And they also understood that sticking with us over the long term and not pursuing this idea this year, and oh, well, NOD, we're not doing that this year, we're doing something else next year, which we often find in the funding community. The Woodruff approach of finding something innovative, placing a big bet on it, and staying with it for the long term, caring for the organization, and most importantly, what's being done here today, connecting the dots and talking about collaboration. That connecting the dots role is something that Barbara Lau has elevated to an art form. And for that reason, we really do appreciate the Woodruff Foundation, and we do mean it. So.
Thank you, Carol. I think technology. Yeah. What I'd like to do for the next few minutes is talk about the four-year report that we, the four-year study and the report that we did on that period of time, share some of the findings that we had with you, the results that we had, and talk about this intensive career transition support model. Now, I will caution you in advance that many of you who are familiar with working with people with disabilities will look at the model and say, right, that's what we do. We're trying to get a common language about this model, because one of the things we found is that there isn't a common language. When you say supported employment to people who aren't familiar with it, you usually get a blank stare. So we have to find a way to communicate with those folks. My background, I've been out of the Army now almost as long as I was in it, which seems a little bit strange, but I left the military in 1996. I was an Army aviator, and I was kind of a aviator, which means, you know, you have a secondary specialty, but my secondary specialty was operations, plans, and training. So I actually had no civilian experience, or nothing that would translate to the civilian world whatsoever. So, after leaving the military, I found kind of a home in human resources, because I went into training and a week later ended up in human resources. I didn't know those two things were hooked together then, but I do now. So along the way, I spent about 3 years as a full-time career coach, working with executives. And career transition has fascinated me ever since I began the process of figuring out what do I do when I get out. So when I came to this program, I said, well, this is easy. This is, I know, I've seen some military resumes. Those things are horrible. These people can't figure anything out. I know how to do that. We just need to get them a good resume. So the model typically is self-directed career transition. And that's a model where first you go figure out what you think you can do. We may give you a book or two along the way and you can look at that. But you go figure it out. Then you should write a resume. Maybe people will take a look at it. You should learn how to interview. And then you should just go network. You'll network, you'll interview, and then a miracle occurs and you'll have a job someplace. So that's kind of how the process works. What I would like to do is take us away from that process and talk about career transition for people with significant barriers to employment. This is an important distinction. Our model would serve any veteran or any person who's in the midst of a career transition. But we're talking about people who have significant employment barriers. And these people, it is essential that they have support along the way. It needs to be sustained support, and it needs to, we'll talk about how that works. When we began our program, we began with the theory of change. Our theory of change was that a warm referral from a knowledgeable individual, the Army advocate, in this case, all everyone that came to us in this program was from AW2, was how we would begin. We would take a career focus, so primarily focused on the career. There are a lot of people out there, a lot of advocates, a lot of agencies that deal with all of the problems, but we wanted to take a career focus and we wanted to be holistic. And we did this through career specialists. So we hired individuals locally that could work face-to-face with the veterans. Very often the first meeting takes place in the veteran's home, where we can get a sense of their surroundings, how they're living, meet with the family. It's veteran-centered, which for those of you who are in the social helping business, that means that we focus on that person and we focus on their goals, not the goals that we might impose on them. Holistic, proactive, and prolonged. So we need to stay with them until they're established on their career path, and that could take years. We also try to measure our success based on what the individual's goals are, once again, without judging. So if somebody, and this has happened, somebody came in and said, I want to be a nail technician. Despite what we may think of that, if they're capable of doing the work, then we would help them achieve that goal. And the other piece of it, as Carol mentioned, is collaborative. So we have to work with all of the resources. We were just one career specialist working with a small caseload, relatively small, of about 50 individuals. And of course we couldn't afford to pay for education and training, all of the other things that the government does such a good job of paying for. But very often individuals aren't connected, so they don't know how to get there. So the, whoops. A little bit about the typical participant. Once again, all of our participants came from AW2, so they had a DOD disability rating of 30% or greater in one area, 25 or a combined 50% in two areas related to combat. This is just a profile of a typical participant. An E5, spent about 9 months in theater. Most of them weren't medevaced. Most of them came back and were found in their units. High school education, I thought the age was interesting. Average age 34. So we're talking about individuals that are mid-career. Their household income, and Brian Williams and I talked about this last night, a very important factor when you're talking to employers is that these aren't entry-level people. Minimum wage jobs don't really connect with them. So their household income was somewhere between $25,000 and $49,000. Now this is after they, while they were in our program, not before. And they had a VA disability rating of 70 to 100%. We talked yesterday about the difference between DOD and VA disability ratings. Primary injury was post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury. And this shows that. These are our participants. 70% traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress as their primary rated injury. So that's a different population. It's a different population than we even expected. And it's a population that has significantly different challenges as they conduct a career change. Okay, so with that, given that population, a little bit about what we were able to achieve. We achieved an 85% increase overall from the time they entered our program until we measured them again, and this was a smaller group toward the end of the program, typically after about somewhere between 24 and 28 months into the program. So we were seeing a lot more engagement at that time. Overall results, so 70% engagement in education, training, and work. We did include volunteer work. Most of the individuals who were involved in volunteer work transitioned later into full-time, part-time or full-time work. We still have some who are maybe about ready to make that transition, but it's important that they learned how to work again. We saw the 85% increase that I mentioned. We also measured their knowledge of their career goals. Remember, this population that may have some memory issues. With the coaching, they had, at the conclusion of the program, 85 to 87% said that they knew what their career goals were, and 87% said that they were confident in their ability to achieve those goals. So I think that's important with that population, and you need a guide to kind of keep you on track to be able to do that. 88% success rate in education. So this is people who went to school and either graduated or were continuing at the point that we measured them. About half participated in employment. Those who left employment, about 50% of them left for education. So after working, they were ready to go forward. So some findings out of this. Most of the individuals that we talked to hadn't joined the military to do something after the military. They joined the military to be in the military. So they didn't really know what they were going to do when they came in, so they really didn't have an idea what they were going to do when they left. Not only that, I would point out, and it's been pointed out by others, that very often the MOS that you have isn't the MOS that you either wanted or the MOS that you really would choose if you had it to do over again. There are a lot of people who enjoy what they do in the Army, but they might not, or the military, might not take it past there. And the education and training programs, there's a big push to get into education and training, but without some career planning at the beginning, sometimes you're burning up GI Bill and other benefits, which is significant. What they expect from employers is meaningful opportunities to contribute. And a lot of employers we found had difficulty understanding this, that these are individuals who have done very important things and had a lot of responsibility. And so the old view of veterans, which I'm not sure where it came from, maybe it's a myth, was that, you know, they were all 19 years old and they were going to just do whatever you ask them to do. So mowing lawns is a good start, and you could go from there. And they wanted to be treated fairly and compensated well for their work. Career paths and promotions, we talked to so many employers who are really reluctant to make a commitment at the beginning of an employment relationship for fear of creating a contract. So a career path is something that can be difficult to do, but it's very important for these individuals. We also found out that, and I think, Karen, you mentioned this, that people would call you and say, wait, I submitted my resume for the job, what happened? And no understanding really of how that system works, and it's all about who not to look at as opposed to who to look at. So it was, there was a lot of frustration with that. I would say, from my perspective, good supervision and management, once you're on the job, is rare. The military teaches that. There's an expectation that there will be good supervision and management, but in most cases, many supervisors really don't have the training that individuals from the military have. So we looked at those who achieved outcomes by the time after they had left retirement. What we found was that there was a 30% drop after a year out of leaving the military, which essentially means we need to make a good start early, and we need to get that focus going. What happens after a year is you get comfortable with who you are now, and you may be somebody else than you thought you were, but you're comfortable. I would also point out that, in my opinion, the MEB-PEB process, or the medical retirement process, has such a focus on disability. It's all about what's wrong with you, not about what's right with you, because you have to get your rating done and you have to go through all of these boards. And I think it's unintentional that it reinforces the idea that you are 70% disabled. And if you don't have some help to realize that you aren't 70% disabled, you can get stuck with that. The more contact we had, the stronger the relationship that we were able to build, the greater possibility of success. So now I would also say that we found in some other research that we did that the number of services that were delivered didn't correlate to success. Very often they, and this is fairly typical in disability work, people who have higher barriers receive more services, and those high barriers very often can cause them not to succeed because they really are barriers. So just some observations about career planning. Once again, self-directed career transition, not really a good approach for veterans who have disabilities. And a big part of that is just being able to think through the process. And when you're tied up with post-traumatic stress or traumatic brain injury and you can't think it out, it really creates problems. We found that having support in the career planning process, dedicated support, as we've heard before, where we talk about what can you do, what do you want to do, what really motivates you, is extremely important. A good career goal that motivates the individual, even if you've got memory problems, you'll know where you're going with your career. If you don't have that, chances are good you're not going to get there. You don't know where you're going. It's been mentioned before, but skill translation models, there are some that are beginning to get better, but you know, if I had done a skill translation thing, and I did, it said that I should be a pilot. And that, I'd enjoyed that, but I didn't want to do it in the civilian world. Carol mentioned the idea of the self-perception and self-esteem, which are so critical to success. There's really not, there is a relationship between the amount of disability rating that you have, but it isn't necessarily a predictor of success. So an individual could have a 10% disability rating for post-traumatic stress, but something could have happened later that triggered it that is creating a bigger barrier than someone who has 50 or 60% that's learned how to work through it. We also found some things about employers. Employers are doing better, but they need assistance recruiting and bringing veterans into the workforce. This is something that we're trying to work on. We very often would introduce our veterans to the employers and make there's some reasons that veterans don't necessarily disclose that they're either veterans or disabled naturally. And you need a trusting relationship with a mentor who will help you understand that and encourage you to make the right decisions. Over time, the communication and support needs begin to go down, but it really depends on the activity. So if we got someone enrolled in school and they were associated with disability services at the school, they had the supports they needed, communication would go down, but when it became time to go into a job, communication would go back up. So there's, once again, consistent support from the same mentor is important, but that mentor may be able to manage the workload a little differently. So kind of to summarize all of that, wounded warriors really don't fit the profile of other people that are changing careers. And so we need to focus on that, not to keep them disabled, but to help them be enabled to achieve their career goals. They are not like other people with disabilities. These are acquired disabilities. And that is a very different process than someone who has grown up with a disability and understands it and is connected with services. So one way I like to think about this, and I discuss it often, is to say, I'm sure that just about everybody in this room has conducted a job search at some point, right? How many have done a job search? Okay, so just about everybody. How many have done an absolute complete career transition? How many have done that with a new disability that really changed your perspective on the world? And it's harder with the disability than it is without the disability, for those of you who've experienced that, I'm sure. So when we talk about what veterans need to transition, there's an important component to that, because veterans with disabilities need that too, but those who have disabilities do need more consistent support over time. They need this high-touch personal assistance where they really sit down. It's not about skills translators. It's not about, hey, let's get your resume set. It's about, what do you want to do? What are you capable of doing now? You may be better ultimately, but what is that? Setting long-range career goals and then establishing a plan to achieve those career goals. If it involves going to school and that's going to take 4 years, what's your plan to do that? Is your spouse going to work? Can you work? One of the big failures we see is individuals who go back to school or go to school for the first time take a full course load with post-traumatic stress or traumatic brain injury, and within a few weeks are totally underwater, and now they've failed. And we have to avoid that cycle of failure. The consistent, knowledgeable guide is very important. There are some wonderful programs, and we've heard a lot about them, but the point is there are a lot of breaks in that process. So when you leave AW2, you may have to go to Department of Labor. Are you going to make that transition? Is that somebody you trust? How do we make that happen? So what I'd like to do now is just get an idea of any comments on those. Is there anything that you see there that isn't your experience in working with veterans with disabilities? Sir.
Bill, thanks. I'm Robert Vixen from the Warrior Salute Program, Rochester, New York. And Karen, certainly enjoyed your presentation. We're new to the Woodruff family here, and thanks, Barbara, for the opportunity. Our program deals very specifically with some of the issues you addressed, and that's just what I wanted to highlight for a minute. We deal with a population of veterans with traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress disorder, that's a little more acute. Not the ones who are requiring hospitalization per se, but people who need intensive support in a 4 to 6 month framework. And I just want to reinforce some of the points that you all made here that we found now in our 4th year of operations with Warrior Salute. There are veterans who have a particularly, I'd say, more intensive need for help to transition. And we've got to give them life and therapeutic support as well as job support in order for them to be successful. So what I wanted to add to the conversation, if you will, is that there is a profile of individuals that we need innovative approaches to on a number of levels. There are some men and women who are going to be more transitional, if you will, than others. There are some veterans, like the ones we serve, you've got to bring them in, provide them life support, therapies, counseling, job transition and a paycheck, and the support for them to live independently. And so we got to be prepared for that as a community. So as we deal with these veterans and the issues of employment and way ahead, the innovative approaches that you represent, I think from the NOD standpoint, are tremendous. We can, I think, provide a complementary effort to it, but what we all need to realize is that we're going to have to tailor our approach to each individual. One size won't fit all. Thanks.
That's a great point. Thank you, sir.
I can't let this go without commenting. So I talked yesterday about our Operation Impact program at Northrop Grumman that focuses on the severely injured. It's been 8 years next month that we've had our program. And so they've done this in the last 4 years, which actually validated everything that we had been doing with our program. So, I'm in constant contact with the NOD folks about, where do we go now? There's 4 elements to this that, there's the recruitment phase and building the relationship. There's the interviewing, getting them the job piece. There's the onboarding, and then there's the post-hire and really keeping them. That's where we are now, and trying to figure out how can we best support them once they're on board. We've done all the recruiting, we've made relationships with all of the right people to get the soldiers, and we work very closely with AW2, but we can't forget about, okay, we've got them all hired. How do we retain them? How do we give them that professional development, get them a mentor and whatever? So, I would just offer that, our program is great for us. We've had other companies that have mirrored ours to develop programs for this population of wounded warriors. I'd be happy to help to share what we do. It's all about sharing best practices and collaboration. So if you don't have anything and would like, to hear more, just get me after. I'll give you my contact information. And I have other partner companies, JP Morgan Chase, other companies that have partnered with us that have created programs for this population. And everything that they're saying is very true. I mean, it is high touch for this population. And I just couldn't go without comment.
Thank you, Karen. And both of the remarks that your comments I really appreciate. What we did was we kind of packaged all of this and we said, no, that's great, thank you, it's perfect, because
Good segue, Karen.
it was a great segue. It was great. So the intensive.
Take you on the road with us?
Oh, yes, sir.
Yeah, so I work with an organization that provides a very specific model to help disconnected populations get jobs. And a piece you mentioned, and sort of referring to best practices, was contact increased retention. And can you just talk a little bit more about what you mean in terms of retention and how you measured the contact?
What we found was that increased contact produced better results. So, in other words, the more contact we had with an individual, the better the opportunity that they would achieve an outcome being education, training, or work. So retention is something that we're still working on because we had a lot of people, because of the economy, who went to school. We'd have to consider, are they still for those, many of them are still in school and progressing. So that was what that meant.
Bill,
So,
could I just ask a question? How many employers are in the room? I'm sorry for coming in late. So,
quite a few.
from our point of view, the work of employers is really the next frontier. We've been working with the military, with government, with community agencies, with service providers, but really where the rubber hits the road is with employers. And there's a lot of veteran hiring going on with employers. But from our perspective, Karen stands among a unique, small group of employers who really recognize that the real work begins once that hire is made. And it's not just about accommodations, it's really about all of the supports that are needed to make sure that first job is successful, and that it's really about career advancement. And that post-placement support piece is the fourth element and the next horizon from our perspective. Very little work that we know of has been done in that area.
And if you don't mind, I'd like to go through the model a little bit, talk about it, and we can apply this. I really, so, post-placement support, we talk about success in a job, really begins in career planning. If you have the right job, or if you have the right goal, and you go to school and you're struggling in school, you can get through it because you know where you're going. And we were talking several times about, veterans have a tendency to turn over pretty early in their employment. We hear that from employers. But it's because the job isn't the right job. It's not necessarily, I mean, they may not have the right support. So they need supports and they need that career planning. So what we're doing here is saying, for those of you who are service providers, this is a model that I'm sure that you use or are familiar with, or you could say, well, that's what we do. We're trying to get a common language to be able to say, this is how we talk to employers so they understand where this begins, which Karen goes out many times a year and works with wounded warriors before they begin the transition. Some of them aren't even in the transition process, to help them find those jobs in their mind. What am I going to do next? So that's reaching back into the career planning process. Career preparation could include a 4-year degree or a master's degree. There's a lot that goes on there. When we talk about job seeking support, we aren't talking about just, here's a deck of people that you should network with, and here's how you should do it. Because we understand that sometimes when you have post-traumatic stress or traumatic brain injury, you don't interview very well. So the folks who aren't getting hired because they couldn't do the job. It's because they don't fit in. They just seem a little odd, or they're jumpy. Or they had their back to the door and they were, it seemed like they didn't want to talk to the interviewer. So we have to talk with them about how to ask for an accommodation in the interview. Soldiers really don't like to ask for that kind of help and admit that they have a weakness, especially with post-traumatic stress, traumatic brain injury, and so on, or even know what an accommodation is. So did you have another?
Yes. So in terms of the post-placement support, I think it's really difficult because it's really hard to find funding for that. It's difficult to find, grant funding that's going to pay for, a case manager who's going to, track somebody at post-placement. We got lucky about 6 years ago that we actually got funding, and we've been building out this post-placement program. And what we found is exactly what you said, was that what has an impact on job retention, which is what I'm primarily measuring, is contact with participants. How do you maintain that contact? You build the relationship. It's not necessarily with the employer in our case, it's more with the participant. And the way of building that relationship with the participant is giving them incentives. And so here's an incentive to come back and see me. And the incentive's not huge. It's enough to get you back in the office because, one, you want to hang out with me. You want to, let me know how things are going. And then I can give you that incentive. We can document the retention, and then we can see if there are any problems happening. We can see, are you having problems with your boss? What do I need to do? Are you about to get laid off? Do I need to help you find another job? And we found that type of contact to have a real impact on retention.
That's a great point. And have you found employers that can help with that, or that do help with it?
That try to...
Let's say mentoring or sponsorships of other veterans, like the veteran resource groups and so on. Does that help, or?
I work with a different population. I think there are some parallels that we could draw. I have not seen that with population.
Do you work with the veteran population, or?
I work with people coming out of prison.
Oh, okay. That's also quite a significant career transition.
Oh, yes.
If you could go back for a second to, one of your slides was about expectations relative to career and work.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious about your thoughts. When I looked at that slide, I would suggest, based on work with a broader veterans population, that set of expectations, it was a chart.
Yep. I'm working.
I'll wait till that one.
There we are.
When I look at the post-service life and the set of expectations, it looks to me pretty generalizable to the veterans population, as opposed to idiosyncratic or unique relative to the wounded warrior population. Can you talk about the extent to which there are nuances in there relative to expectations about career and work for the wounded warrior population that are maybe not generalizable more broadly to the veterans community?
I'm not sure that we found too much that was different than the,
I mean, and that's interesting and important in and of itself. If the answer is, you know what, the expectations are not any different between the wounded warrior population and more broadly the vets community. I mean, I think that's interesting in and of itself, but I was curious if there was anything that was unique to the population in terms of what their hopes, aspirations, expectations might be relative to work.
you know, I think that the difference, or the only possible difference, might be the understanding of the supervision and management and flexibility. Found that many supervisors in our experience are, well, you know, the veteran will go to their supervisor before they'll go to HR. So they won't request an accommodation from HR, they'll request it from the supervisor, which probably drives most HR people a little bit crazy, because then when the veteran's terminated, it's like, well, now what are we, what are we going to do? We could potentially have a lawsuit. I think that is one area that may be it, but I don't think that we had anything where the veterans with disabilities had any expectations that were different than other veterans.
Mike, were you asking the question, are the employers expecting something different?
No, I was actually from a
'Cause that's what-
vet-centric perspective.
I see.
You know,
Do they expect something different?
Are there different expectations?
That's an
No.
interesting question,
Yeah.
because we didn't actually talk to, this is the first time we've heard that, because we didn't talk to a population of non-disabled veterans.
Yeah, and that's, when I look at that, having spent a lot, you know, a fair amount of time working with the broader veterans community related to employment, that's exactly what I would expect in terms of from a veteran transitioning to the civilian world of work, in terms of expectations. That's what we hear, and that's why I was interested to, you know, are there idiosyncratic expectations, goals, aspirations that come with being a wounded warrior? And I don't have the answer to the question.
Something worth looking at, I think. I'd actually say, now that I think about it, most of these are probably pretty generalizable to everyone who works.
Yeah.
So. Yes, sir.
I touched on this a little bit yesterday, and I think this does represent potentially a concrete example of what Mike is talking about. You know, among the general veterans community, if you're a one-term, if you served one term of enlistment or a small amount, you're transitioning to a civilian career, and you have you know, a strong motivation to move on and do something else. I think there's a certain degree to which other veterans who are transitioning do have you know, some potential disincentive to move on and transition well. And you know, we have retirees who have a 50% paycheck that may or may not be sufficient either to support their families or to have the lifestyle that they'd like. And then a spectrum on up there for people with disabilities who have either disability compensation that may be more significant or in the case of some, and we were talking about this issue yesterday, some combination of support that includes Social Security, unemployment, and a variety of other things. And so I think that that level and of course how you look at it also can affect how that's described and how it's characterized could potentially affect how you treat it. So, I mean, those of us who have been disability retired receive what is called disability compensation. It is, you know, not tied to whether or not you work, but there's a whole other category of assistance that absolutely is. And so these people, you know, while they may be receiving support that they absolutely need, if it's characterized if it actually depends on being characterized as unemployable, that could present a real problem for making a successful transition to anything different. And so I think that whole spectrum of support and how it's characterized does actually represent something that's very different among veterans and veterans with disabilities and other people who are making similar transitions.
Thank you. That's a good point. It happens a lot, I think.
My name's Julia Ashley, and I'm with Paralyzed Veterans, and I think he brings up an excellent point. And we would flip it around just a little bit. We have a program called PAVE. It's called Paving Access for Veterans Employment. And one of the key issues is preparing the veteran from a benefits side. When you look holistically at the veteran who's transitioning from service, the benefits they have to be there to support that transition. And it's a critical piece to it, and one that we're very much engaged with. And on the flip side is to work with them to create that expectation of you've got a benefit, you don't want to jeopardize that to meaningful employment. So, that benefit piece kind of needs to be in the conversation to get them to a place where they're beginning to look at employment. So I think that's a very important point. Thank you.
One of the very important things that we do during the initial process of career preparation is assessments. So a financial assessment, to be able to talk about that is very important. So thank you. That's a very good point. Steve?
One of the interesting things about this discussion is the actual numbers of people who come back with service-connected disabilities and how many are being seen at the VA. You hear a lot of numbers. There was some numbers put out yesterday. Prudential did a survey of over 2,900 veterans, and of those that we surveyed in this random sample, 65% of them had some issue that they believed was connected to their service in the war in which they were seeking help from the VA about. The VA itself, I think, of the total population that has served, is seeing roughly about 56% of the total population of OAF, OEF that's served are coming and seeking services from the VA. So it's really, there are, as we know, veterans coming home with injuries, and obviously companies need to address that. I think the magnitude and the scale of it might be more than what has been reported, but it's certainly something that every company ought to look at and be prepared for.
I want to disagree with Steve. Sorry, Steve. So I'm a combat wounded 100% disabled veteran. I don't need any work accommodations. 30% was the number yesterday, 65%, whatever the number is, that's VA disability, right? If you dislocate your shoulder in the Marine Corps, do 5 years, you come out, you're going to get 10% for it, you have a VA disability. You're not disabled, you have a disability rating. I think it's very important that we differentiate between the VA definition of disability and the National Organization on Disability definition of disability, especially in the workplace. So I would actually argue that the numbers we see from VA should be halved or more when we're thinking about accommodations necessary in the workplace. And it's just really important because we don't want to paint the entire veteran population as a disabled population, because we understand that there are challenges in acquiring and maintaining work that you all work so hard to focus on. We can't take the accommodations that are made for the people who actually need it and be siphoning it off to 65% of the veteran population who, like me, being 100% permanent and total disabled, I don't need those accommodations. So just a thought for the room, and if anybody disagrees more, I'd love to hear that too.
We had a meeting with a consultant who hadn't talked about this before, and we talked about people with 100% disability that were 100% disabled. And she said, well, why are you getting them a job? We said, well, it's not really a disability, it's a rating. She said, well, then call it a rating. And that's a great point, because there are people 100% permanent and total unemployable who work and have productive careers and don't require significant accommodations in their work.
It's really simple. I'm 100% because I couldn't fly a black hawk helicopter anymore, right? And other reasons.
We probably have time
Thank
for
you.
one more question.
Yeah, I think the question of the distinction between the VA's definition of disability and the definition of disability by either the National Organization for Disability or the ADA, I wonder if someone could just say what is the definition of disability under VA terms and what is the definition of disability under the Americans with Disabilities Act? Or that.
If I might, there are a lot of definitions of disability. There's the DoD definition, which is how able are you to do your job in the military. There's the VA definition, which is how able do we think you are to, what's the compensation for what we did to you when we broke you? Basically, OFCCP has different definitions. ADA has different definitions. What I would propose is that the definition we use is not about disability, it's about a barrier to employment. So if you have a significant barrier to employment, you may not have a disability rating, but you still, these are the veterans who get a job and then they're gone, and they get a job and they're gone, and they get a job and they're gone, because maybe they're dealing with PTSD, or perhaps they have some other disability or just psychological barrier to work. Does that help, or are we just way out there?
I guess what I'm getting, the VA definition of disability would be an impairment that makes it so that the service member can no longer perform the function relevant to the position within the military, but it's not related to is that correct?
That's the DoD definition.
That's the DoD definition.
You can't do what we need you to do every day. In fact, like you said, the VA definition is we did something to you during your term of service, you have a detriment because of it, we're going to pay for a rate for it.
And we'll actually talk extensively in the next panel about disability work accommodation, and we have experts in this, including the definition under the ADA, the types of work accommodations that are available, and so on. So great transition question.
And just to say, the ADA definition of disability is not the only definition of disability among people who think about disability. So it gets even more complicated. I won't go into any of it if you're going to do it, so that would be helpful.
Right.
Good.
That's a very complex issue. It's a great question. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. If we could thank Bill and Carol, I appreciate it.